Welcome to Modern Anarchy, the podcast featuring real conversations with conscious objectors to the status quo. I'm your host, Nicole.
I tried to keep her quiet, but she's screaming outside of me. I tried to keep her hiding, oh, shut up. I tried to keep her quiet, but she's a wild, wild woman.
On today's episode, Dr. Matthew Gamble shares his journey from serving as a pastor to discovering a newfound freedom in our sovereignty through expansiveness and curiosity. Together, we talk about the need for community in plant medicine, the importance of both trust and respect to sustain love, and the power of the narratives we tell ourselves. It was so lovely getting to talk to Matthew. I mean, he shared everything, and I loved the level of rawness that he opened up his heart to talk about his struggles and his joys and the mistakes and the celebration that is his journey of finding himself and his truth. And I feel like it's so clear when people are resonating and vibrating from their own truth, and Matthew definitely does this throughout his episode. And I also want to say a huge shout out to the first Absolute Anarchist Patreon, Scarlett, who is supporting the podcast at a $5 level because they believe in authentic expression and holding space for the diversity of the human experience. And so heck yeah, I'm really excited to get to know you further, and if anyone else is interested, we'll be having a monthly Q&A for all the Patreons so we can hold more community space for all of our anarchist hearts and just have a safe place to be able to express ourselves and be fully seen in our authentic expression. And so if you want to join that conversation and join the community, then I'll ask you to pledge to support the podcast. We have the $2 level or the $5 level. So that's about like 50 cents a podcast. That's not that much really, actually, but yeah, it's great. I'm really excited to get to connect with you further and to listen and get closer to all of you listeners out there that make this podcast what it is today. And it's really all of you listeners that keep me coming back and doing this work. So I just want to say a little bit of love to all of you checking in each week. I hope y'all enjoy this episode and tune in. How are you doing?
I am quite lovely. Actually, I just got back from the gym, got a little cleaning done, and feeling quite good.
Nice.
Been working on a mala today. These are not the gym and cleaning happens on the regular. The mala does not, but it's been lingering for a long time. My mala broke, and
what is that?
It's just a mala. It's a pearl necklace.
Oh, okay.
Like 108 bead pearl necklace.
Sure.
So it's kind of like a Catholics to rosary, Buddhist to malas.
Interesting.
Yes.
Is there a significance to the beads?
For me, are we going? Are we on?
We're on whenever you want to be on, baby. But yeah, kind of. I mean, I just start chatting with this is what I do.
I know, that's Amanda told me.
She's like, it just starts.
So in 2000, it's a long story, but in 2019, I was on a sojourn and where I was going through this separation and ultimately a divorce from my bride of 17 years. And
wow.
I rekindled a romance with my high school sweetheart, the woman I lost my virginity to.
Aw, adorable.
And it was amazing. It was just this epic, galactic love affair, really. And she was really into prayer and meditation, yoga, was doing her yoga teacher's license and going through her own transformation. And we were in Asheville, North Carolina on a road trip and bought all the beads for it and then made it with her help. She's real dialed that way and just crafty and thrifty that way. And
sure.
And then I ended up walking a 1,000-mile pilgrimage that year through France and Spain called the Camino de Santiago.
Okay.
So
wow.
So I carried that with me and then prayed with it, regularly, walking the trail, would just go
Wow.
through it. And what the beauty of it for those of us with the ADHD brilliance brain, it just is a good source of grounding, like a tactile grounding
Sure.
resource,
Sure.
especially if you want to go through a mantra. And that's what my understanding is that's what it's there for, is to hone in on a mantra. You're praying the mantra 108 times.
Mm.
But as with most things, sometimes they will snap or break. And
Sure, sure.
a lot of people that I've talked to or have told me that when that happens, it's just time to let that go and
Ooh.
return it to the earth, make an offering with it
Mm.
and then start something new. So I'm in the process of putting a new one together.
Oh, so yours broke.
Yes, mine broke. It broke more than once, but I was kind of in denial, and wanted to salvage it.
Yeah.
And it's just, I've had these beads for a while. Actually, I was with Amanda when I got these beads and just haven't put them together, but it's coming now.
Mm-mm. Is that symbolically representing something, do you think, that you need to let go? Is that like what you're saying is the meaning, that when that happens, that's something you need to just let go? Or is it just
Oh,
saying
no.
like the item itself, just let it go,
Well, I think both but
Yeah.
certainly when I did make that mala an offering, I know the time and place. I don't know the exact date, but
Sure,
I know
sure.
exactly where I was in St. Augustine, Florida, where I call home, and
Mm.
and making that an offering was big because I don't feel like maybe I'm in denial if I said I'm not super like sentimental, but there's
Mm.
certain things. So maybe I am super sentimental, and there are certain things in this life that I just may mean trash to one and
Sure,
treasure
sure.
to me. So
Sure. Yeah, I mean, what made you hesitant to say that you were super sentimental?
um, just because a lot of things don't mean shit to me, or like
Yeah, sure.
I'm not I'm not a big gift giver. I
Mm.
give it, receiving gifts can be really put me into a real trauma state. I'm kind of being tongue in cheek, but
Oh.
actually serious. Like
Oh,
it can
wow.
like just the act of opening a gift in front of people can be really traumatic for me because I feel like I'm often forced to lie because they've given
Oh,
me something that was meaningful to them,
yeah.
or whatever, they felt obligated to bring a
Right,
gift or
right.
give me a gift. And I find that more times than not, it's like you've handed me a burden because now I feel like returning this, or I don't
Mm-hmm.
want this, and now I've got to pretend that I like this, and I don't pretend well, and
Right.
so yeah,
And what would
boy, that
yeah, and like what would happen if you were honest?
well, a lot of times that I am. I hope I'm honest in a way that's gracious, but I think that that's the difficulty, and sometimes
Mm.
like I'll intentionally, if I'm given a gift, I'll intentionally avoid opening it in front of the other, or
Yeah.
something along that line. I've been known to like siphon gifts from under the tree and hide them
Sure. Wow.
so as to not have to open them on Christmas.
Yeah.
This
Wow.
is definitely going differently than I had anticipated, but so good to see you, Nicole.
Just doing my
All
thing
right,
over here. Deeper, deeper, deeper.
there you go.
Yeah, and always feel free to ask me questions too. I play this game too. You can probe me as deep as you want to go, and I'll just bear open.
Cool.
But yeah, I'm thinking about where is that coming from, right? It comes from this deep place of you caring so much so about the other person that you are so worried that if I'm honest, it's going to hurt them. And like, wow, what a place of love that is coming from.
That's an interesting take, and yeah, honestly, it was the source of a great strain on my marriage
Mm,
because my ex's number one love language was
gift
gifts,
giving,
and
wow. Oof,
of the five, like mine is like a 6 or 7 is gifts, and so
sure.
I would often joke like I could wrap up some Tic Tacs and hand it to her, and it would just make her day to be able to open up a little gift.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
but then I would often like talk myself out of gifts, and I aspire to be more generous.
Yeah.
And then when I do give, it's often out of something that I feel really deeply about. And don't get me wrong, Nicole, like I've received a number of gifts that
Are
are
great.
sentimental, or
Yeah,
yes.
sure.
So I don't want to, I did a whole thing with Amanda flipped on the video camera around Christmas, just before Christmas, because Christmas is like freaking nightmare to me.
I'm
And then I
sure.
and then I have a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old that love Christmas and love gifts and love their mama and the
Mm-hmm.
grandparents, and they all shower them with all this stuff
Sure.
that I see go in one hand and into the other and into the trash bin, and it messes with me. So I'm like 2 years ago, I said to them, what about this Christmas? Flip the script, and I'm going to give you guys cash, and you guys can choose to do with that money what you want. And I said, what do you think is fair for this Christmas each? And they said, I think they said $25 each.
Mm-hmm,
And I'm like,
mm-hmm.
yes. And I'm like, well, what about $100 each? And then you guys can do whatever you want. It was the sweetest thing to see both my children chose to get their mom a gift first,
Oh,
thinking of themselves, which I thought was sweet. And then
yeah.
they thought about, got gifts for each other
Oh,
first, and then started buying things for themselves. And it
oh,
was just, it was fun. And then it was like this win-win. And then this year rolled around and they looked forward to it. It was like, so just kind of like you with Anarchy, and I would love to hear more of your
sure.
story, but it's flipping the script on the paradigm,
Mm,
of the expectations and the rules and
sure.
regulations. And I remember leaving when I left Susan in December of 2018. The whole mantra or the whole mindset was like, if I don't do this, I run the risk of just living the rest of my life and not being able to show my children a second side of life, a different side. Like
Wow.
if I stay in this, I'm going to be in this
Oof.
construct or these
Yes.
rules and
Yes.
regulations, and daddy marches to the beat of a new drummer, and it's scary because I don't have my act together because of all these unknowns, but I'd rather run the risk.
Yeah.
And while it's been super hard and very painful parts of it and very dark night of the soul-y, I have had multiple occurrences where we're in the midst of an experience, like taking them paddleboarding down the river or
Mm-hmm.
camping, where I just realized this would not be happening. So
Mm.
it's just like I'm reminded of the beauty of the decision, the hard
Yeah.
decision.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
And I love how you grounded it so much so in it's not even about me, it's about my daughters, my children. Or is it daughters? Both daughters?
A daughter and son.
Son. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. So, yeah, it's not about me, it's my children. And for them, I will bravely step into this identity that I know to be more authentic to me because I need them to see that and that will teach them so much truth. Could
Yeah.
you paint a little bit more of the two worlds that you were straddling at that time?
Yeah. So in 2017, the beginning of 2017, I was at a place where I'd been pastoring, including my ministry through undergrad. And I just briefly, I converted from atheism through my teen years, high school, and converted to Christianity when I was 21. And then really just jumped right into ministry. My story of conversion kind of preceded me. And I jokingly referred in the denomination, if you've ever heard of Seventh Day Adventist,
Mm-hmm.
a chance. Okay. So in that denomination, I became a B level celebrity, meaning there's 22 million Adventists worldwide, and they
Sure.
have one of the largest private education systems, one of the largest hospital health systems on the planet, and not to fail to mention a very large church system. And I literally spoke all over the world to human beings, blah blah blah.
Wow.
And then in 2017, I'm sitting in bed one night, and And I was really suffering because I'm like, where is God? And here I'm
Mm.
pastoring a church that's growing, but I'm like, I don't feel God. I mean, yeah, if I'm listening to music, I can feel good, or emotions can come
Yeah,
up, or if I
yeah.
hear a moving story, emotions come up, but I've never physically felt God, seen God,
Mm.
heard God.
Yeah.
My senses have not experienced, and more importantly, my inner, I really could not see a palpable difference between of my inner life, of my inner struggles of BC or AD. Yes, I was doing all these things in the name of God, and going to church, and had a wonderful experience, but then I'm like, what am I doing? I was labeled a sex addict. I was in like 12 steps, but I'm like, where is God if I'm an addict? I thought
Yeah.
God agreed to like give me this new heart and purify me from the
Sure.
inside out. And that's the gospel I believed. That's what I subscribe to. That's what I'm
Right. Of
proclaiming. But
course.
then my marriage has fallen apart. Inner life, some of the, deep struggles I've had, I just don't, it feels like God doesn't really care.
Mm.
In January of 2017, I come across Dr. Roland Griffiths does this TED Talk from Johns Hopkins University. I think at that time it was already a couple years old. And I'm watching this like 60-some-year-old polished man in suit and tie, the most unpsychedelic looking human being. He doesn't look like a hippie type of guy, and he's just rattling off the incredible findings that Johns Hopkins has discovered after over 15 years of studying clinical cases for psilocybin and its efficacy for healing depression, anxiety, addiction issues, PTSD, and end of life. And quite frankly, I'm laying there in bed watching this thing next to my bride, and I'm like, my noggin was blown.
Mm.
I'm like, I'm suffering from some of these things. I've been praying, seeking, fasting, eating communion as much as possible, like doing whatever I could to get the fix, but it wasn't happening.
Mm.
And so I was in this crisis. I was actually, yeah, I'll take a breath.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Take a breath for a moment. What I'm thinking about from my own experience is how painful that must have been to been in that place, because I feel like what Christianity really pushes is if you're not feeling that transformation, it means you need to pray more.
Yeah.
You need more God. You have so much sin that you have not confronted that you need to let go. Your heart must be
Right.
hardened somewhere.
Right. Which, I mean, I could go off on, on Christianity for some time, and gratefully my path has kind of led me to this place where I have deep compassion for Christians,
Of course.
but I'm not at this like angry, I'm going to take the church down. But it is interesting to hear people like, that do want to give the sentiments. Like one guy reached out to me recently that I know, and he's like, you need to pray that God will circumcise your heart. Like, all right, so brother, after 20 plus years of following Jesus and doing all of these things, oh, that's it. I miss it's always, it's
Mm.
always in your court. Like the picture of out of Christianity, I feel like is really of a God that is proactive
Yep.
in people's life,
Listens.
and basically telling you have an issue that I can resolve, and because I love you, I'm going to initiate this
Mm-hmm.
resolving
The change.
healing, right?
Yep.
But for me, for whatever reasons, and I have my rationale now, but that healing never came. And I think the big difference is, in the work that I'm doing now and in the journey that I'm on now, is that I'm now getting into the heart of the matter by actually turning inward. And instead of looking at myself as this dirty sinner
Yep.
that needs to jump through these particular hoops in order to be saved, it's like, no, let's resource yourself to actually see, are you able to look in? Are you able to metabolize this pain? Can you actually, as Amanda talks about the inalienable sovereignty, can you actually find your sovereign power?
Mm.
Which again, these things are very contrary to modern day Christianity,
Oh,
right?
completely. As someone who was equally a follower, granted never to a level of going down a pastoral route and doing that whole thing, this is a whole different level than I ever reached, and the amount of time that you have spent. But yeah, I just remember this huge pressure that if I had a journal, and I actually read it recently, and I was praying that God would take me away so that he could fill me up. And just even that thought, right? So much of me, like, strip me of my sin, because all of my being is quote unquote flesh, right? It is sinful.
Hmm.
I need it to drip away so that God can fill me. And that level of dissociation to yourself and your
Hmm.
own desires and your process, I don't want to talk poorly about Christians who are in that faith, right? But I will say that the dogma is inherently harmful to people's sense of self.
Yeah. Yes.
I don't think that that's what Christianity means at its core. I don't think that that's what Jesus taught, if, believing the text of what we see. But I think
Yeah.
that the way that it's brought now and pushed together on people is inherently problematic.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm liking the phrase lately, 21st century Christianity, because I do think there's so many, you mentioned the word dogma, there's so much dogma, there's so much cultural things that are taught,
Hmm.
beliefs that are taught within Christianity that one could argue have very little to do with Jesus.
Yes.
The other thing that blew my pumpkin, talking to one of my kind of atheist agnostic friends that we were in college together, he grew up Adventist, is he said, it's interesting that the Bible was written around roughly 500 mile radius.
Mm.
You have a 1600-year gap between when the Bible that people often refer to the book of Job as the first book written, but there's a 1600-year span that the Bible was written in 500 miles. And here you have these people claiming we are the chosen ones from God, everybody else is going to hell in a handbasket, and oh, by the way, we're the ones writing this too. And what
Mm-hmm.
dawned on me is that while in that 1600-year span, in that 500-mile radius, you had God communicating to these cultures and tribes and peoples of all different types at the exact same time, that were receiving different messages or different insights or different allies. These plants,
Sure.
these are living wisdom, so open my worldview to be in a posture of a lot more expansiveness, openness,
Yes.
curiosity,
Yes.
humility, that I find really rejuvenating. And then honestly, when I'm communicating to Christians, it's happening more recently that I'm noticing this, but I can understand where they're coming from, exactly what they're saying. I know what they're going to say before they're going to say
Yes,
it.
exactly.
And then I realized too that it's not, it's also not my job to pull them out or
Mm,
to tell them they're wrong or to, because we're just dealing with a totally different paradigm. We're looking at life now through completely different lenses. And, God bless you, Jesus loves you, and peace.
right. I mean, my mom and sister are Mormon.
Hmm. And I know that came up with Amanda because she was born and raised Mormon. And I did listen to that interview today.
Mm.
I was like, I'm going to go check this girl
What'd you
out and
think?
see
What
what.
were your initial thoughts about me?
Oh, I'm actually really intrigued because you
Mm.
you dropped into that you were in this evangelical world, and now
Yeah.
you're doing sex coachy and all of these things. So I'm very intrigued. Oh, and
Yeah.
then you're PhDing, is that?
Sidey, but yeah, same sort of deal.
PsyD, thank you. I have a D-Min, believe it or not, a doctorate of
Sure.
ministry,
Amazing.
but a PsyD, excellent. Queer piece of just identifying that, the open relationship, like all of these things. I'm like, it's just like a yes. I love the openness and Amanda in my life, which I've now mentioned her at least a half a dozen times, it seems, but that's also been one of the more epic or most epic, be right up there as most epic elements of this journey that I've been on, with
Mm.
divorce in 2019. And then Amanda and I met at the end of 2020. And here I'm like, I don't know what I still am working a lot out, trust me.
Mm.
But here I'm this like agnostic-y, what the fucky is going on
I
y
love
type
that.
of guy.
Yeah.
And I had this 83-year-old man, because it had been like over a year since I had been divorced. And this guy, I invited him and his wife over for dinner, and he was like, "You need to get online and start dating." And I'm like, "Nah, I'm not ready, da da da." And I got online, opened up Facebook. I didn't even know it existed, but Facebook has dating.
Sure. Yeah.
And long story short, Amanda and I met. We had a Zoom call for an hour, and I went down there on November 8th, 2020, to her home, and it's just been an incredible journey
Wow.
that here I am, this ex-pastor that's met a founder of a church.
Yeah.
Here I was working with psilocybin alone. I was not in community at all. I
Hmm.
was just doing it all alone, and for the most part anyway. And here I meet this priestess who's holding ceremony and working with these medicines, in just an incredible way. She's founded her own church. Because you're a sex coach, I'll go ahead and tell you, the first night we met, we ended up on her back porch to ingest some cannabis out of a
Love
bong,
it.
and it was cold out. So we end up with the bong, and again, freezing out there, and we're talking, and we had this kind of blanket and hug. This was kind of our first hug, and we're
Yeah.
holding, and her face is in my,
Mm.
her mouth is close to my ear, and she starts pouring out her vision for her church and the work she's doing. And I literally got an erection
Oh,
holding this woman
wow.
and hearing her vision,
Wow.
and tears. I mean, I was emotional because
Yeah.
I'm like, I can't believe I'm holding another human being,
Mm.
that all of what I'm doing in this life right now, and everything that I've left behind, like, this woman is affirming and validating, and
So
it's core
much.
to her being. Like, I was just like, absolutely had my noggin blown. I think that's the third time I'm using
Yeah.
that phrase.
And I absolutely love that you talked about how you got an erection from that because people really need to expand their concept of what is erotic, right? Like, yeah,
Yes.
like, here's this person deeply, deeply connecting with your
Hmm.
core sense of identity and all this that you have gone through. So, yeah, that is a deeply erotic and intimate moment.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it was beautiful. We've actually shared that story now a few times, and obviously it's not something we had planned or saw coming, no pun
Sure.
intended, but I was like, I just, again, we often find ourselves, and I can speak for myself, I often find myself in the relationship just blown away by
Mm.
the gift of it all. And then furthermore, now, because she's been a long stay in the Bay Area for the past 20 some years doing this type of work. And our community is growing as a couple, and that too has been just really beautiful to see the evidence of other people where I just went through a lot. Like, I got labeled, especially in 2017 when I first started getting into entheogens again. Again, the TED Talk, and then Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind really
Yeah.
just set me on a path. But I got labeled bipolar, you're
Wow.
manic. It really put me into a state of despair, and
Yeah.
curiosity, but also being overwhelmed, like, holy shit, what if I've lost the plot here, and I'm just going down the
Ugh.
wrong path. But
Yes.
so there's been a lot of scary, and it's like, I feel like that's part of the hero's journey.
Right.
We go through these seasons, and I certainly have, and I feel like I'm still emerging, to be honest,
Mm.
of this, the proverbial dark night of the soul, or
Yeah.
the death of the ego, and I'm certain that there's more ego to die off. But working with these medicines and with the intentions and all of these things, it really takes you to your core. It really, really takes you to your core. And then having a partner like Amanda, who mirrors
Mm.
such a practiced, disciplined, grounded, priestessy, goddessy healer, it's just such a gift. It is a real gift to my soul, and I believe gift to those who get to meet her and be
Yes.
around her. And
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, the beauty of connection and deep intimacy with someone who can see you fully. It is such yeah, it's I like when she said don't F up the ineffable, so I'm not going to try and describe
Yes.
it, you know what I mean? But
Yes.
exactly what you're talking about. I have to ask, have you heard of the sacred mushroom on the cross? I'm sure you have. I'm sure that is.
I don't know if I've heard of that vernacular. Are we talking about
Oh,
how people have are discovering like Christianity and psilocybin and that type of thing?
yes, the sacred mushroom and the cross, the Dead Sea Scrolls. He was a pastor, someone who studied them fully in the original text, and then came out to say that from his studies, he really thinks that Christianity was an Eastern fertility cult. That when they'd say, "Oh, I take the flesh of the dew of the morning," that was actually mushrooms.
Hmm. Yes, I have. There's this couple that they were on, like, they were in like the Holy Lands or whatever, and they started seeing the Amanita muscaria
Mm,
mushroom painted in these old temples and, Christian temples, and they were like, huh, that's interesting, and it just set them on this path. And they've been studying. They have, I think their book is called like the Psychedelic Gospels or something like that, but they are out teaching, sharing, and I would certainly love to learn
I
more. Yeah.
know. I mean, and it's so interesting to me as Christians, like, how could we not even think that, this is a gift from God, right? Like, if
Yeah.
everything he makes, everything on this planet, why did he make those mushrooms for us? Just thoughts.
Yeah.
When I was Christian, I never would have, it's of the same level of like, don't get drunk, don't partake, too much of the wine sort of idea for me, where I would just not even think it was possible. But it's interesting to me that Christianity nowadays does not seem very open to even the possibility of the benefits of something like psychedelics or plant medicine.
Right. So within Adventism specifically, which I was always ecumenical, meaning I had good relationships with people from across denominations, but within Adventism in particular, there was a strong defense about anything that was mystical. So anything
Yes.
mystical is of the devil. It's new agey. It's creeping in. And I'm like, it's Eastern religion. I'm like, well, Jesus was from the East. Like, what do we? So there's like this innate fear
Yes.
around mysticism, especially in these traditional Protestant religions, that it's
Hmm.
everything. There's an answer for everything, and if it doesn't fit into our context, then it's a no,
Right.
and you're going to hell in a handbasket. And I find, the word entheogen was coined in 1979 by a group of scholars, scientists, who I believe were faith-based, but when they coined the phrase entheogen to offer an alternative to the word psychedelic, what they were saying is entheo, so theology is the study of God, and theogen is the God within. We're recognizing that
Ooh.
these allies help you to actually experience the God within. What does modern 21st century Christianity, I believe, want to hinder you from or hold you from is really tapping into the God within. So we're going to make conspiracies about these allies, and we're going to judge them, we're going to critique them. Or as one person said when I was an advocate of cannabis, instead of using amphetamines for my ADHD while pastoring, they're like, well, not everything. Going back to your point, not everything out of the earth is good. Look at poison ivy and blah blah blah. These chemicals are being now shown. The scientific data is precedented, coupled with the fact that many of my Christian friends, also scientifically backed, many people within Christianity are on your SSRIs, your antidepressants, your ADHD medicine, your sleeping medicines, and all of these things. And these are shown to not only be just merely putting a band-aid on, some of them have tremendous side effects. Whereas these natural allies that we're looking at and using and incorporating in a ceremonial way in our context, they are shown to be non-addictive and complete healers that, again, people will be critical of me, and that's fine. But no offense, but it's like if you want to actually come see yourself and see under the hood, go and sit in a ceremony. You know, every time I sit in a ceremony, it's often coming out of my mouth to affirm the group because I feel like it's so brave. Like it is
Mm,
brave to come into this setting, to walk into a church on a Saturday or Sunday morning and sing some songs and drop coin in the bucket and walk out where you have no real accountability. No one is really knowing what's going on behind under the hood
yeah.
is a very different experience than walking into a ceremony where people are going to see you at some of your most vulnerable and walk with you through some of the deepest and darkest or some of the most joyous and highs of highs. And but it's very, very vulnerable, hard reality that you're facing, but you're also facing it in a way that is very healing and very real. It's very tangible. It's to me, it's just a night and day different experience. And though my sphere is smaller these days, I'm just so grateful for the authenticity and the healing, you know, is happening in my own life and as evidence in the lives of others as well. It's a beautiful thing.
I feel like one of the most profound things, in my opinion, that it does is soften us. So much so, just soften us. So when
Mm-hmm.
you are confronting those things, you're much softer to it and you feel the full emotions of it. And I obviously have no scientific proof on this, but I feel like I notice when I meet other people that are just so open, vulnerable, and willing to share their good and bad sides. I'm like, you've done some psychedelics in your path. Like, right? It changes people. Like, I don't know how else to put that, right? But it does. It makes you feel naked emotionally. And once you've been naked emotionally, and still stood there and been okay on the other side,
Mm-hmm.
you walk through this world in a different way. And could you imagine if church, when they
Mm.
talk about taking communion every Sunday, if the flesh, taking of the flesh, you know, from the morning dew was really a mushroom every Sunday and you had that level of just emotional softening and
Mm.
connection with your community of people,
All
like,
right. Be a game changer for sure.
I think society would act in a completely different way.
Right. And I think to your point, whether it be psychedelic, because we all have these chemicals already running, the DMT is already in us. I think your point about when you meet somebody and there's this softness, yes, it could be psychedelics, and or yes, it could be that this person, it's just evidence that they have gone through something intensely painful where back to what you said, they've been stripped naked and bare,
Yep.
and either they were able to behold themselves in that vulnerable space and or
Mm-hmm.
ideally even in the context of community, and they've emerged healer as a healer or at least more whole in their life. There is just this softness, you know, where it's like, who the hell am I to judge? You know, let me approach this with curiosity. You know, what's the elevation here? It's a paradigm changer for sure. One of the things that our community is recognizing is there's so much awareness with like podcasters like your Aubrey Marcus and Joe Rogans that are talking about these things so publicly and advocating for these things, and your Michael Pullens of the world that, you know, these books are really influential. So now you have this awareness of people that are like, what if this would work for me? But then they don't have the community or they don't have the support, they don't have the environment, or they don't even know where to go, you know, or they don't qualify for the clinical trial, but they want these medicines. And so granted, I feel blessed, and actually the medicine showed me in one of my journeys of the importance of being out here on the West Coast and where I live, as part of the whole trajectory of the path that I believe that I'm on. But that is to provide opportunities for people to be in a very cared for environment. I don't have, it's not to say that I know groups and resources, even in Chicago. I do know some people in some areas, but I would say that that is one of the things that Living Wisdom Church is looking to do right now is we're building a whole, really putting together an entire blueprint to help us produce reproducible gatherings that where we're even training up leaders that can hold space. And obviously that's a long process and all of that. But we do offer a free, we just launched a free monthly, first Wednesday of every month. We have a free online on Zoom entheogen preparation and integration circle that Amanda and I are holding for this very purpose. So, but to co-facilitate with her has been both just really
Mm,
beautiful and humbling. And now we're moving into a place in March together where we'll be able to
yeah.
host together.
Yeah, and I love the way that you continue to see so much in Amanda, and I'm sure she has to be inspired by you as well to walk this life of being a pastor and proclaiming to be deeply connected to God and to let that go and embrace a whole new identity.
Yeah. Yeah, it blows me away. I mean, there's a couple things come up for me with that. Number one is there's a book by a Christian author. He's an Anglican priest named Richard Rohr, and he wrote this book called Falling Upward. And it was just on my Audible on loop. Just I don't know how many times I would have gone through that book, but basically what he talks about is these two halves of life. And he seems to insinuate that for those there's like the minority go through this phase where they enter into the second half of life where in order to get there everything dissolves. So my title, position, office, ultimately my house, my marriage,
Yeah,
my paycheck, my bennies, I didn't just, it
everything.
just all dissolved. And it was just like, what the fuck? I was
Yeah,
just so, and just so cut off, like, is how I felt, like abandoned. And, not to play too victimy, but it
absolutely,
was hard
though.
to not feel victimy a bit. And like, what is going on with this thing? And then to, yes, be in this partnership with Amanda where I'll be honest, like I will tell her often, like, Amanda, please remind me of your love for me or appreciation.
Yeah.
And maybe because out of my number one love language in my intimacy partners is affirmation. So I tend to give a lot of affirmation. And it's not that I want somebody to just blow hot air, but it's like I want to be reminded or I want to know what you see because no offense, right now has been a season where I see a lot of pain and suffering and I'm not, so having your validation, but the beauty is with Amanda is a couple things. One is she's massive into prayer and the attributes that the woman was calling into her life, I happen to embody. It's like lucky me because it's like, it's just the way I show up for her
It
is
works.
it works. So it's like, how beautiful is that when it's not me having to like, sure, there's effort involved at times or things you
Yes.
go out of your way, but there's so much ease and flow.
Yeah.
It's just like, holy shoot. And as a matter of fact, we had opened her past. She's been around a lot of polyamory
Sure,
and open
sure, sure.
relationships, ethical non-monogamy, all of it. And I've had none of it.
Okay.
I've had none of that, none of
Sure,
poly,
sure, sure,
open,
sure, sure, sure.
none, 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 none. And we decided to go down that path. And it was just there was some interesting dynamics, and I read some books on it and just kind of
Mm,
learned. And then ultimately, we ended up breaking off at one point, stayed friends because I believe going to be working together as ambassadors of prayer, which is a phrase that came out of her mouth. But we pray together, we're healers together. I see that work. And here we broke off the relationship at one point to come back even stronger. And I'll confess that some of it was my own. She's a couple years older than I am. And like there was some of these insecurity pieces of
sure.
me or superficial pieces of me that needed some healing and some clearing. And now we're just at this at we've nixed the open relationship piece and just celebrating the monogamy and celebrating how we show up for one another. And I just honestly, and I want to be careful to not put her too high on a pedestal, but as I've alluded to earlier, I just have not been around many human beings, and never have I had this close proximity to somebody who walks the walk. I mean,
Mm.
she is like a very, I like to, a well-oiled machine. She is very dialed in her practice and process. And in my kind of ADHD, non-disciplined, didn't have rules or structures as a kid much, and da 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 da. It's just so impressive and awe-inspiring. And so I really do believe in the work that she's doing, and quite frankly, it, for lack of a better phrase, it's very much an honor to show up with her. And there's times where there's challenges.
Mm.
As I like to tell her, she uses source, and I think that was one of the questions: how do you define source or God? And that's where she talked about the ineffable.
Yeah.
But there's just been times where I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't
Of
know who I'm
course.
praying to, you know, and here's this woman that is so kind of grounded and polished, and she extrapolates a little bit from Buddhist and a little Hindu here, Native American tradition, Amazonian traditions here. And it's like back to that comment about the 500-mile radius that the Bible was written in. It's like out of that desire for these different world religions, and where is the love? How can where's the healing? What can we learn from these other cultures? Here in this partner is this depth of knowledge. So it's almost like I texted my ex the other day, who she's with a partner who's very wealthy and loves gifts, just showers her and my kids with gifts. Texted her and just was like, does it ever hit you that maybe we received what our hearts were looking for? Because I find so much in Amanda that, in that, back to that statement about us being broken up, I just came to the place where I'm like, this woman embodies so much
Yeah, that you
that I
wanted.
love and adore. And, you know, we're moving in together. I have my kids, and my kids adore her. And there's a lot there, but there's just so much there, yeah, that it's undeniable. And so it baffles me, but I am grateful that I show up in a good way that's nourishing to her and supportive to her and her goals and dreams and aspirations. And we truly are becoming better people because of it, individually and then as a couple, and then our healing network is growing, and just a lot of beauty, a lot of beauty.
Yes. Yes. So I was thinking, have you heard of, well, I mean, okay, one, that was a lot of emotional intimacy to share. And I love seeing how authentic you are when you express your love for her. And it is just so clear the many ways that you look up to
Hmm.
her. I'm also thinking about, have you heard about relationship anarchy?
Not that phrase, no.
Okay, so what I'm studying for my dissertation and hoping to do as a future clinician studying relationships is like, how can we get outside of this binary of monogamy or poly, right? We have relationships. You have relationships with a ton of people, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
not one or the other is more important. And when you were with Amanda the first time in an open relationship, your relationship didn't stop when you stopped having sex with her, right? You took on a different relationship role. You were now platonic with her, and it was still a relationship
Mm-hmm.
you had in your life, right? And so it's
Mm-hmm.
like, I don't think there's anything wrong with having relationships that go through these evolutions, right? Where you start out open, you go
Mm-hmm.
platonic, then you go back to quote unquote monogamous, but really
Mm-hmm.
what you're doing is closing
Mm-hmm.
down and creating levels of safety. And if now
Mm-hmm.
20 years later, you're like, you know what, I really want to open back up and have that experience. Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do we create
Mm-hmm.
relationships that can evolve over time rather than being like, you're monogamous or you're poly? It's like, no, you are with this person right
Mm-hmm.
now. And what else do you want? Like, let's start from there and create
Mm-hmm.
it.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. I'm glad you said that, honestly, because I think when it comes to one's inalienable sovereignty, which is at the core of Amanda's, you know, really at the core of her belief system, her whole worldview, opens up. I mean, and you're right. I think these labels of monogamy versus poly and all of that, it's like it is when it boils down. I think labels can serve their purpose in the sense that we're speaking a language, and language is going to break down, but it can help us to define things or to understand things. It can also confuse things. But I think your point valid, and I like that you're using it. It was, did you call it relational anarchy?
Yeah, it's relationship anarchy is the term.
For somebody hearing it on one hand is it could be triggering and they're like, oh, it's just like anything goes. But in reality, it's inviting one to say, okay, if the stereotypes and all the rule and all the expectations were pulled back to what you just said, what do you really want? What do you want? Is something lacking? Look, I struggle with insecurity and I share them with Amanda in part because it's healing, in part because it's laughable. It's like, what the fuck? But like there's men in our lives that are freaking amazing. And I can sit around and be jealous about these guys that are these like, I mean, she knows some incredible human beings. I do too, but
Sure.
like I can sit around and be jealous of them, or I can look at it and see this as being really edifying and this is feeding her. And it just, but it boils back in my simplistic brain back to the paradigms of like,
Yep.
for those of us who were raised with monogamy and it was just, you stay in the marriage and the dad isn't meant to have a meal with a woman and the mom's not meant to have coffee with another man. All of these rules and regulations can really set one up for failure. And for those of us that are opening up a little bit, from people like me, it's like, wait a second, maybe there is another way of looking at this whole thing where instead of my ego getting wounded, I'm actually celebrating my partner's life being edified. And as Amanda's helped me to see, like, then she's coming back stronger and like better and more complete, and it's only enhancing us. It's not something to be threatening. As
Yes.
painful as some of it can be, I think there's also a lot of beauty in the expansion. So kudos to you for your studies. I'm
Thank
so
you.
intrigued by what you'll discover and how you'll serve and all of that.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. It's funny that you brought up that the anarchy could scare some people. So, this is something that has been going on within the ethical non monogamy, which I guess it is considered non monogamy, right? Monogamy in and of itself has this really weird structure about levels of importance of who you should be spending time with, exactly what you said. So, it's technically not that, but it's also not necessarily poly, right? It is this freedom. And so, I was thinking about it like, since there is no published literature on it and there's no books on it, right? Hi here, like how can I take these ideas and build it into something that does sound more like digestible? So I was like, liberated love, conscious, co-created connection, like what I don't even know, and I'm just curious if you have any ideas of like what could capture this, because it's true, anarchy has a lot of negative connotation with it.
So are you the one who coined the phrase?
No, that was Andy Nordgren in like 2002 or something, like super early poly kind of people who were taking this phrase of just like, let's take off all labels of this weird hierarchy.
I think for the people that understand our anarchy and recognize it for what it is as something that is elevating and benevolent and coming from a good place. I think for the person that hears that word and just thinks of like tagging and people destroying,
Yes,
like,
exactly.
but I like the phrase because it is be triggering. And then I love how you defined it, where I can't remember the exact phrase you just used, but you talked about the sacred connection or the conscious,
Co-created connection.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's the piece. If I'm consciously co-creating, and that's another big word, or big piece, is that I learning to recognize I'm co-creating this. I think there's just for those again, for the person that feels open, I think you're on to a lot of beauty and a lot of power, empowering an individual to actually step into their inalienable sovereignty, to step into their power, and instead of it being under the shadow and like, let me sweep this lust under the carpet.
Yes.
What if I was in a relationship where I could come and it wasn't a threat, say, hey, I'm really into this, or I'm into that, or, can we try this on? And, it feels very liberating what you're describing.
Yeah, and maybe it takes 20 years of intimacy building before you could get to that point where that's what you want in your relationship. Fine.
Right.
Great. And maybe you never want it. Great. You know what? Like, let's be free in this. And exactly what you're talking about, that sovereignty of like, it's kind of like that same thing, Christianity, this model, like, this is how you live your life, this is what you do, and this is how you achieve. It's like, no, like, you have the freedom to make your world what you want it to be, right? Obviously,
Right.
co-created with someone, but you have that ability to craft the relationship you want. And I feel like it's insane to think that when I start with at this point will sustain me all the way through 60 years. You're going to be a
Yes.
whole different person, and you might want
Right.
different things, and like, let's just leave space for that.
Right. What breaks my heart, I mean, for the couples that have been together for, ages, my parents being one of them, I think there's a lot of beauty. But my mom on a recent trip last November, I took my kids back to Florida for a couple weeks, and my mom shared some things that just are heartbreaking, like of really limiting herself. And then, you get to a place at the end of life, and it's like, back to that epiphany with my kids, and I still see it paying off. But it's like, if I'm going to live, if I have the best that I know, and we could go into the oneness and all that, but what I do know is that here now, I've got a stab at life. I have this chance, and I'm going to have to live with the choices that I make. And for my mom in that scenario, to me, there's a lot of sadness and a lot of like
Mm,
restriction. I think there's also a lot to be said about long-term relationships, but how much better if in those long-term relationships, some of these constructs that are so limited were to be, whether they were completely evaporated or maybe just dialed down a bit to open up that freedom. I see that being just so very helpful. Case in point is me cohabitating. I've known Amanda for a little over a year now, and here I was, a Christian pastor that would have been, absolutely fired on the spot if I was cohabitating. It's just it's like not even that. I just don't even paradigm that I once would have been in. It's just so foreign to me now. And I think that that's the beauty, Nicole, of anarchy. I think that's the beauty of the inalienable sovereignty, is like when we can step in and just be freed up to be in the wonder and the curiosity, and start letting go of some of these definitions or expectations or paradigms that have been put on us. And on one hand, it's unnerving because it's like the moment you start unwrapping one, suddenly you just start realizing how invasive this is, and it can be somewhat overwhelming. And at the same time, bring me to a place of great solace, of great peace, of great joy, of great awe and wonder and expansion, not because I have it all figured out, but because life is opening up and
mm.
continuing to expand, as opposed to being in this controlled box.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And I'm thinking about the couples that have stayed together for multiple years. And you know what? There is a lot of people that would find so much joy in that, because this life and what you make meaning is totally up to you. So if your meaning is
Beautiful.
that I'm a dutiful person and I'm going to live out this
Yes.
duty, that I married this person and I'm going to stay with them forever, you can have a great life because that is what you find meaningful, right? If
Beautiful.
you find meaningful this level of self-exploration that you were talking about and have always been grappling with, then that sort of thing feels restrictive. And it's ultimately coming back to this question of like, what do you want in your life? What makes you find meaning? And it sounds like you're living. Like what you're talking about is just being fully awake, fully in yourself, fully in your desires, and fully in your vulnerability. I mean, I don't know how else to live.
You know what's beautiful about what you're identifying in the relationship, or what comes up for me, is love is easy. It's easy to fall in love, and love comes in all different shapes and sizes. Trust and respect can be really, really hard,
Yeah.
be really difficult. But Buddy of mine a few years ago, before the divorce, we were sitting in a car not too far from here, smoking some herbal cannabis. And as I was describing my plight to him, he's like, "Oh man, she doesn't trust or respect you anymore. She lost her respect for you." And I swear to you, Nicole, that was like a moment. Now that I'm saying, I don't know that I'll ever forget it, because for me, it was a very clarifying moment where I drove away from that conversation like, holy shit, my bride does not respect me or trust me. I'm trying to make decisions based out of following my heart. She backed it up and affirmed it by saying, Matthew, as you just said, as you've heard me about and rambling and sharing my own life, you just said, Matthew, you've been on this seeking, you're searching. My ex will tell me, your seeking and searching frustrates me. It's just like, I don't do that. Why can't you just accept all this stuff? And I'm like, so here's this woman that doesn't, she loves me,
Yep.
always love me, but she doesn't trust me and she doesn't respect me. And I would submit that once those two things are gone, you can be loving all you want, but if you don't trust and respect, you're done.
Right.
And I think the vulnerability piece of what I sense you're on to, and opening up and freeing the human race up, for those people that are fortunate to work with you, are going to be freed up to again put down the paradigm and say, what is really at your core? And it's not to say that I have my life all figured out. It is to say that I am doing my due diligence to show up with authenticity and integrity. And the beauty, back to the relationship with Amanda, maybe we should come on sometime. I don't know. Back to her, it's like there's nothing I can say to this one. Yes, some things will be painful or emotions can come up, but the love is there. And then this trust, this underlying and overlaying current of love or trust and respect are there. So it's like we're constantly focused on okay, how is this elevating us?
Yes.
What is, and it's just, it opens up so much beauty and wonder and appreciation and faith and just all these things that I've been calling for. So
Yes, and that is so beautiful
beautiful.
to see the way that it lights you up. And I think what we know from psychology is that we have a confirmation bias, right? So the second, what I'm coming back to, the more I study psychology, is how important it is, the narratives that we tell ourselves, because that is what we take away. We have this moment with a stimulus and, some sort of reaction situation. And then the narratives that we tell ourselves about that and what we take away from that moment that gets lost in the past is what we hold on to and then craft our identity, right? So then here's your partner coming in, starting to lose respect for you, has the love, but starts to lose the
Mm-hmm.
respect and the trust. Once you have that narrative running through your mind, now you have a confirmation bias. So when you do something that shows that you're not worthy of respect or worthy of trust, it starts building up, building up, building up. And now you have all this information and narrative. And now, yeah, you're in a really tough place because now you got to work through all those thoughts that started way back when in this small moment, right? That maybe there was this
Yeah.
loss of connection between the two of you. And then it just goes. I mean, this is the problem with people coming into couples therapy at that point, right? When you've already lost that respect, all of this stuff now that you have to peel back
Yes.
with onions of
Yes.
how did we get to this point? Yes. Yeah. I'm passionate about it.
Well, that's so good. We're on to that right now. Amanda and I are in the midst of this dynamic right now where I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and it triggered an awareness of me of a narrative. Glad you used that phrase, word. But a narrative that was playing in my brain. Clearly, I was aware was there, but I didn't have the awareness enough to articulate it until it triggered something in the podcast triggered.
If you didn't bring that up to her with that full level of vulnerability, what happens is it sits there and then it grows. And then you have one other confirmation moment where you see it again. Then you're like, yep. And then you hold that and you start resenting it.
Yes. And that's so I'm going to tell you what it was, Nicole.
Yeah. What was it?
I had this story story, a narrative in my brain that Amanda didn't want me to succeed. Part of her that did not want me to succeed. I articulated that to her, and of course, it did the way. Do you know Marco Polo?
Yes.
It's like a walkie-talkie app, like a video. You send a video. I think it's more Amanda. I think she would own this, but she just doesn't do phone real well. Like she doesn't get on calls much. Some with some, but we don't talk on the phone much. But we do send polos over. And even though I felt like I owned, it ended up being triggering for her. And what we're working on though now is like I'm seeing this I was owning, I have this story. I've heard that we have some 50 to 80,000 different thoughts every day. And then I've heard that, Joe Dispenza talks about how the bulk of those thoughts are based on non-reality. So like you said, we have this experience and then we start making up this story about it, and the story is actually a lie, but it's so real to us because we just keep playing it over and over again in our head. So Amanda's like, WTF, Matthew, all I want is to see you succeed. That's all I want. That's all I pray for. And so back to your point though, what's happening for us is it's providing us fodder because we trust the love is granted. I love you. We love each other. Everything's good. But the love is granted. But the trust and the respect that her and I have create this container where I can share this piece. And yes, it triggered her. It didn't land well initially. But we're still in the process of discovery because of the trust and the respect. And it's deepening the understanding. And it's also beautiful because then I'm able to articulate some of the stupid bullshit or the filters that I'm like, damn, sweetheart, you're amazing. And here I have this piece of my brokenness, my woundedness that is looking at you out of suspicion. And I hadn't even articulated it. I was in my psyche, but now that I'm articulating it, now I can own it and just be like, God, what is this about? It couldn't be further from the truth. So let's get to the truth and back to, can we rewind and say, okay, where's little Matthew feeling insignificant and that no one gives a shit about him and doesn't want to see him succeed? And so what's it done for, and this is why we're so excited about working with relationship couples. And we're seeing more couples like reach out to us kind of spontaneously. We haven't even advertised anything, but it's like, what's happening for Amanda and I? The honesty comes out. Yes, it was painful or it hurt, but the honesty comes out. And now what's happening? She just texted me, I'm on my way over to give you a hug.
Yes.
The elevation is happening.
Yes.
The trust increases, the respect increases, ultimately the love increases. It's like a win-win all around.
It is. And this is the beauty of relationships of all types, right? Not even just sexual relationships, this level of open communication and that deep seeing of one another and that trust that you have. When you start looking at that with all of your relationships, you feel so full and saturated. And as you were talking, I was thinking about the quote from Nietzsche who says, there's no truth, there's only interpretation.
Nice.
And I'm just like really leaning
There's no
into
truth,
that.
Yes.
Yes, we're like, yes, there is truth. There was a capital T truth of reality of some sort of stimulus, so we like to think, And so within that, we might have all saw the same thing, but even in like police reports and all these other pieces, we know people have different views of the same sort of thing, and
right.
Amanda talked about even quantum mechanics, right? Whether you view it or not has different, we just know that so much of reality is based on yourself and your own positioning, right? And so to have that level of awareness where you can see your own thoughts, I think that is so needed. And for me personally, I think the biggest way I found this out was recording the podcast, because what I'll do is I'll record 4 in a week, which means I'm probably going to look at this conversation again in a month which means in between now and then, I have coded in my head what that conversation was like. And I noticed that when I first was starting to do this, I'd be like, that conversation sucked. I ruined it. I stuttered. I did all this stuff. I did all that. And I'd go back to edit it, and I have a literal live recording of the time. And I was like, oh my God, wait, I don't sound bad. This is what? And I started to recognize, wow, in just a month of not sitting with that real moment, I have created a whole different narrative. And then I come back to say, like, how often am I doing that? Oh my God. And having just this huge realization that everything that I tell myself is happening and the way I code this narrative of my life is my reality.
Yes.
So then I was like, I wrote the quote on my fridge next to the other one. I was like, you can choose your audience, right? When you're looking at Amanda, you're choosing how she's receiving you every moment through how you're interpreting all of her stuff. And so, yeah, to have the vulnerability to say, the story I'm telling myself is, and then that
beautiful.
gives, this space for your partner to respond with, oh, I see it, rather than you're doing this, you're doing that. It's like the story I'm telling up here that's scaring me is this.
Yes. Beautiful. That analogy or your experience with your podcast is perfect example of that.
Hits me so many times.
It's freaking insane. I mean, I could go on and on about the nightmare that my brain has caused me.
Same. This is why I'm becoming a psychologist. I'm like, can I figure it out, please? Because I'm not okay. Yeah. The one question I do ask everyone is, what is one thing that you wish other people knew was more normal?
Golly.
I know. I love this question.
May I start by saying what I wish was more normal in society? I'll say what I wish was more normal was I wish more communities were available for people like you and me to sit in sacred and safe containers. And what I wish people knew was normal is that there's a lot of very normal, successful, healthy, beautiful human beings that are working with medicines that may be out of your scope of what you thought was normal. There's just a lot of normal people out there that are turning to these allies with great success. To quote Borat. Honestly, Nicole, it's a bit challenging because I kind of take it for granted the Hamiltons of the world, that I just kind of take it for granted that these things are more normal or are more accepted. But I would love to see that this not be such a stereotypical or like, I think psychedelic, that word is just so stereotyped by so many.
Connotation, yeah.
Yes.
Exactly. Here we are. The power of language, right? And I'm just thinking too, I mean, this whole podcast, your whole journey, your whole story is such a prime example of what you're saying, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I'm living it every day, for sure. There's an element of it that does, I don't know if easier is the right word, because a lot of this work is really tough.
Yes.
It's not for the faint of heart, in my humble opinion. And I think a lot of people in this with the stereotypes just think of it as like, the Timothy Leary of, dropping out and, well, tuning in. I would argue he was onto it. Like, this is an opportunity for people to really tune in. And if things have not been working for them, this may be a beautiful opportunity, for some genuine healing. Quit putting the Band-Aid on everything and take the Band-Aid off and get into the nitty-gritty.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. And you said you walk the walk, and that is also one of the biggest things that I was hearing out of your love for Amanda. And I just also want to take the moment to give you words of affirmation that you are walking that walk, and it is so clear.
Beautiful. Thank you. Honestly,
you are. Yes. I hope you see that in yourself and feel that in yourself.
Bless her heart, because she's sitting here right now, but it's tough for me to see sometimes.
Of course.
Like, it's tough. It's tough to see sometimes, but I honestly, I mean, it's pulling up emotion just having you affirm that. So I appreciate that. And, I got a text today from some kid that heard me years ago at a youth event on the East Coast, and he saw a video of mine, and it was just very affirming what he wrote. And I have there's the critics and all of that, and then my own inner critic and all of that. But honestly, conversations like this, and then, there's so much we have hit on, and it would be lovely to connect. I hope our paths do cross in person, or that the relationship can somehow. You should come out for ceremony. But it's just I don't know, there's just something kindred, I feel like, with you and your journey, and then especially your academic pursuits, and like you having the awareness that you do at such a young age of like, imagine the work that I can do. It's really beautiful. I'm really excited for you and inspired by your journey, and wishing you all the best. I do have some people that could help you with your podcast.
Shape me. Shape me. Every person you pick changes me. So shape me. It's also this podcast. So like, yeah.
Even more kudos for you for just putting yourself out there and doing the hard work and like taking the bull by the horns. Sounds like you're on it.
Dude, I'm trying. I still get social anxiety. I'm like, oh, strangers. And I'm like, oh, wait, I talk to strangers on a podcast every single week. Like, what am I... If you enjoyed today's episode, then leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcast. And if you're a part of the Anarchist community, then follow us on Instagram or nominate a guest for the show by sending in a letter to modernanarchypodcast@gmail.com. Otherwise, I'll see you next week.